Hive Fleet Leviathan is the largest and greatest Tyranid hive fleet to invade the galaxy. It attacked in 997 M41 from the galactic south. Unlike the majority of previous hive fleets that attacked from the Eastern Fringe, Leviathan instead skirted under the galactic rim of the galaxy and then pushed upwards through the galactic plane, spreading its forces across a broad front that covered the Ultima Segmentum, Segmentum Tempestus, and even into the Segmentum Solar. Leviathan's strategy was to form its forces into two giant tendrils hundreds of light years apart, in such a way that it stretched the shadow in the warp over the vast distance between the two tendrils, stopping all psychic contact between the trapped worlds and the Imperium, and also blocking Imperial reinforcements from navigating the warp towards the beleaguered worlds. The creatures of Leviathan display a recognizable coloring of white skin, with purple carapaces and usually red weapon symbiotes. Tyranids from Leviathan's newer offensive into Segmentum Pacificus seem to have a slightly different color scheme, consisting of a more purplish hue over their white skin and a different shade of purple for their armored segments. One of Leviathan's main tendrils, which was on a projected course directly to Terra, was eventually stopped at Tarsis Ultra. However, Leviathan as a whole remained undefeated and continued to assault the galaxy. Leviathan consumed countless worlds. In response, the Imperium is reinforcing entire systems, raising thousands of armies and dispatching dozens of Space Marine chapters to troubled areas. Meanwhile, several craft worlds of Eldar used ancient destructive weaponry to reduce planets to dead worlds, and the Tau developed new technologies and weaponry to combat the Tyranids. Thanks to the formation of the Great Rift, much of Leviathan was cut off as it made its main assault on Baal, homeworld of the Blood Angels. Most of Leviathan was destroyed during the period known as the Blackness against the Defenders of Baal, the Indomitus Crusade, and newly materialized demonic armies. In M42, Leviathan shocked the Imperium by launching a massive new offensive, consisting of several new tendrils into Segmentum Pacificus, threatening Segmentum Solar itself. The following is a history of Leviathan. In late 997 M41, the Imperium first lost contact with several systems in the Segmentum Tempestus. Inquisitor Kryptman implemented a great astro-telepathic augury, which became known as the Kryptman Census, and eventually made contact with every documented planet on the southern fringe of the Imperium. The worlds that ceased to respond began to form a pattern, and Kryptman identified it as the approach of a hive fleet of terrifying size. Leviathan's principal attack formed two tendrils hundreds of light years apart. The Imperium lost contact with the worlds, trapped between these two jaws, and if these jaws closed, they would devour all trapped inside. The planet of Tarsis Ultra stood directly in the path of one of Leviathan's main tendrils, the tendril on a course towards Terra. Tarsis Ultra was defended by the Ultramarines, led by Captain Uriel Ventris, along with the Mortifactors led by Chaplain Astador, and supported by the 10th Logres, led by Colonel Octavius Rebellarch, the 933rd Death Corps of Krieg, led by Colonel Tryman Stegler, and PDF regiments headed by Major Satria. Inquisitor Kryptman was also present to impart his extensive knowledge of the Tyranid threat. When the Tyranids arrived in the system and consumed the planet Barbarous Prime, the Imperials launched an attack in space. Despite an initial victory in destroying a hive ship, Kryptman wished to invoke Exterminatus upon the world Cordelis, as it was the next planet in the path of the Tyranids. Ventris was vehemently against this and supported an alternative solution to slow down the Tyranids by exploding a hydrogen plasma refinery in space, thereby destroying another hive ship. However, Krypton lied to Ventress, and with the assistance of the Mortifactors, invoked Exterminatus, in spite of the Ultramarines' plan succeeding. The Imperials attempted the same space refinery trick again to destroy yet another Hive ship, but the Tyranids adapted to this ploy and the plan backfired on the Imperials, crippling their fleet and forcing the survivors to flee. Tarsis Ultra was left unprotected from space, allowing the Tyranids to launch their final planetary invasion. Tarsis Ultra was besieged for several weeks, only just managing to hold out under the command of Uriel Ventress and later Krypton. The tides eventually turned in Imperial favor when Ventress and a Death Watch kill team captured a lictor from the original wave of the invasion. Magos Biologis Vianco Locar reverse-engineered the lictor's genetic code to design a biological plague that would send an early-generation Tyranid into hyper-evolution and thus kill the creature. If delivered to the heart of the swarm, it could destroy the entire tendril. Ventress then joined the Death Watch team in infiltrating the final remaining Hive ship and delivered the plague to the Norn Queen. Slowly at first, but with gathering speed, the Tyranids turned upon and attacked each other. Their synaptic control had been lost. At this point, the remaining Space Marine contingent of both the Ultramarines and Mortifactors were down to 16 men. The majority of the remaining Tyranids froze to death under the harsh conditions of Tarsis Ultra, with a minority surviving and taking refuge in warmer surroundings. The Imperial forces launched a counter-offensive, which destroyed the swarm and stopped the invasion. Leviathan's tendril, on a course to Terra, was dissipated, and the once doomed worlds caught in between Leviathan's two main tendrils began to register on Imperial augurs again. The rest of Leviathan continued to rampage further into the galaxy, and so Krypton ordered a galactic cordon be established to slow the Tyranids' advance and buy time for Battlefleet Solar and Battlefleet Tempestus to muster. The cordon forced a band of worlds in Leviathan's path to be evacuated, and many of them to be razed to the ground to deny Leviathan any bioresources. Worlds already under invasion were destroyed with Exterminatus, just as the Tyranids descended to feed upon the doomed planet, making them expend bioresources to claim a world only to lose everything upon it. Krypton's cordon condemned billions of Imperial citizens to death, the single largest act of genocide upon the Imperium since the Horus Heresy. His actions were met with outrage by many influential inquisitors. He was labeled a radical, a traitor, a fool, and the Inquisition ultimately issued a carta extremis that stripped him of his title and reduced him to a criminal. But his cordon did succeed in slowing Leviathan's advance to a crawl. Krypton, despite being cast out of the Inquisition, decided to harness the swarm and turn it against the galaxy's other enemies. He planned to use a tendril of Leviathan to eliminate the Orc Empire of Octarius, as the Imperium was stuck in an ever-escalating war against Octarius that the Orcs were dominating. Krypton led several specially equipped Death Watch teams into the caverns of Carpathia to attempt to capture a brood of live gene stealers in a stasis field. The mission was successful, although Krypton's force suffered heavy casualties. He then planted the brood on board the Perdition's Flame, a space hulk that emerged from the warp in the path of Leviathan. As the gene stealers awoke, he destroyed the moon of Geist in order to divert the hulk's trajectory directly towards the Octarius Empire. Despite the Orcs' efforts to quash the gene stealer infestation, a tendril of Leviathan changed course towards the psychic signal of the gene stealers and invaded the Empire. Within weeks, a dozen worlds in the Octarius Empire became infected. Leviathan was nearly stopped by the Orcs at Gorala. When Leviathan's fleet arrived, they were countered by every Orc vessel within a dozen light years, as well as extensive minefields hidden amongst Gorala's asteroid belt, which tore bio-ships apart in cataclysmic explosions. Orc gunships assaulted the surviving vessels before they had time to react, and the Tyranid fleet was all but destroyed. However, a single bio-ship managed to break through the Orc blockade and hurl itself at Gorala, heedless of pain or injury. It launched thousands of mycetic spores onto the planet's equatorial plains. On the planet's surface, the small Tyranid swarm cunningly adapted its tactics in order to slowly but surely gather more bio-resources and increase their numbers. When Scarfang, the Orcs' leader, was killed by Lictors, the Orcs on Gorala collapsed into infighting and became easy prey for the Tyranids. Each tribe was isolated and destroyed in quick succession until, within weeks, all the Orcs on Gorala had been killed. The bio-resources of the planet were turned into new bio-ships, and the Tyranid infestation quickly grew again and spread to nearby Orc worlds. The war eventually spread to Octarius, the central world of the Empire. Never before had Octarius seen such bloodshed, and the war soon spread from the planet out to the entirety of the Octarius sector. Other Orc worlds lost to the Tyranids include Orok, Deragon, and Keltor. The Octarius War continues to escalate to date. Recent reports indicate that the Tyranid Swarmlord has joined the assault on the Orcs of Octarius. Kryptman's plan to have both Xenos species destroy each other at first appeared to be successful. However, his plan backfired. Orcs from light years around are flocking to Octarius and are growing bigger and stronger on their diet of conflict. And every Orc devoured gives more biomass to the growing Tyranid swarm, which is constantly learning and adapting new ways to defeat their foes. Kryptman started a series of events that is making both sides stronger. Whichever race wins the war will emerge stronger than before. Meanwhile, Leviathan continues its assault on the galaxy. 24 Space Marine chapters were known to be involved in containment operations, with Captain Az Solari of the Raven Guard in overall command. As of 997, M41 Imperial Guard Army Group 12, comprised mainly of Catachan and Jornian forces, continued to hold out against a tendril as reinforcements were being raised. In 999, M41, a tendril of Leviathan was identified to be on a direct course to the Blood Angels' homeworld of Baal. Despite a delaying action in the Kryptos campaign, Baal eventually came under Tyranid invasion. The Tyranids were on the verge of victory until the Great Rift formed, as a result of the 13th Black Crusade and its aftermath. The sudden warp storms cut off most of Leviathan inside the Baal system, while great demonic hosts surged into the Imperium. Nonetheless, the Tyranids were on the verge of victory on Baal until the arrival of the Indomitus Crusade, led by Robute Guilliman himself. After many battles, the devastated world of Baal and its 2 moons were won. What became of much of Leviathan remains mostly a mystery, swept up in the period of chaos known as the Blackness. What is gathered, however, is that newly formed demonic forces moved against the Xenos. On Baal's moon of Baal Prime, the symbol of the bloodthirster Kabanda was formed from the skulls of many fallen Tyranids. In the wake of its defeat at Baal, Leviathan's remains have launched a vast offensive along the southern border of the Segmentum Solar. The Tyranid assault now reaches as far into the galactic core as Bloodfall, home world of the Red Wolves. Recently reinforced with Primaris Space Marines, the Red Wolves proved stubborn and deadly foes. until Leviathan unleashed its most fearsome weapons. Broods of monstrous biotitans spawned in the brutal furnace of the Octarian War and glutted upon potent greenskin biomass. Diverted from the ongoing war with the Orcs, these monsters are formidable siege organisms. With colossal hooked forelimbs, they smashed great rents in the Red Wolves' fortifications, and swarms of gene stealers flocked into the breaches. Their fortress monastery hopelessly compromised, their losses horrific. The Red Wolves were forced to retreat, securing vital stocks of gene seed and evacuating upon their remaining battle barges. The Blood Angels and their successors continue to be plagued with Leviathan, as seen with the Angels' Halo campaign. Faced with the ever-evolving remnants of Leviathan, Lord Commander Robuti Gilliman has reinforced Segmentum Solar and has dispatched several Primaris Space Marine chapters to the front lines of the Tyrannic Wars. The Fourth Tyrannic War began in M42, when the largest invasion of Leviathan began in the western reaches of Segmentum Pacificus. The assault began with the coordinated attack from above and below the galactic plane by two new tendrils dubbed Nautilon and Promethor, respectively. The two tendrils are moving in parallel towards Segmentum Solar, and with the Imperium distracted by the Indomitus Crusade, few forces initially stood against it. The first indication of the Tyranid threat was silence across much of Segmentum Pacificus as the shadow in the warp descended. The loss of communication with many outlying systems initially went unnoticed by several sector commands due to the typically slow wheels of Imperial bureaucracy, the presence of warp storms, as well as simultaneous Orc and Nid threats. The scale of the threat was finally discovered in the Morpheum Sector Command, thanks to the horrific death of High Astropath Gideoth. Consumed by the shadow in the warp, the Astropath was transformed into a tendrilled monstrosity that wrought destruction across the astropathic choir before finally being put down. Simultaneously, reports finally began reaching Imperial authorities of a Tyranid attack of unprecedented scale. The Byroth subsector was consumed by Tyranids as its Imperial Guard forces battled Orcs. At the Trinary Reach cluster, a Leagues of Votan fleet suddenly retreated as the Imperial defenders of several factory worlds rejoiced, only for the Tyranids to descend in their wake. Vast refugee fleets began arriving in the Heratus stars, the Mytolian Belt, Templum II, and Gethsemanax. Despite security precautions and quarantines, Tyranid xenoforms and spores still got through and caused bloody uprisings in the aftermath. Gradually, Imperial commanders were able to put together a horrifying picture. Two new tendrils of Hive Fleet Leviathan, of unprecedented size, had invaded Imperial space in a coordinated effort. One, dubbed Nautilon, was moving into the Vina sector from above the galactic plane, while the other, dubbed Promethor, was moving into the Morpheum sector from below it. Worse still, these two tendrils were coordinating with one another in a roughly paralleled eastern advance. It was a route that, if unaltered, would take them into Segmentum Solar and towards Holy Terra itself. The Imperial response to this horror was typically inconsistent, with some governors overseeing total mobilization to conduct a defense, while others simply led a mass abandonment. Some Space Marine and Imperial Navy elements sought to wage whatever defense they could, while other Astra Militarum armies began to attempt to create defensive lines to stem the Xenos advance. Soon enough, the eyes of the Emperor of the Adeptus Custodes learned of the Tyranid threat and the danger it posed to Terra. The frigate Pinion docked at Terra shortly after, bringing word of the threat to Captain General Trajan Valorus himself. Valorus subsequently met with the rest of the High Lords of Terra. With the forces of the Imperium mostly committed to the Indomitus Crusade, Many feared that Segmentum Solar was now defenseless to face the incoming threat. However, Valoris and Lord Commander Solar Arcadian Leontus oversaw a massive mobilization effort to ensure that the invasion would be blunted. A policy of aggressive defense was formulated by the garrisons of the Imperial Guard, while rapid response strike forces, known as Soul Blades, were established for more elite forces. These Soul Blades would consist of a mix of Space Marines, Sisters of Battles, Militarum Tempestus, Knights, Mechanicum, Inquisition, and even Custodes, and were given a wide range of strategic autonomy. It was hoped that while they were low in manpower, their highly mobile and autonomous nature could disrupt the Tyranid advance. By the time the first Soul Blades appeared, over half a dozen sectors in Pacificus had been consumed by the Tyranids, but proved highly capable in disrupting the Xenos' progress in local counterattacks. As the Soul Blades bought time, Valoris and Leontus oversaw the establishment of a defensive line to protect Segmentum Solar, dubbed the Sanctus Line. This was based around key anchor worlds, each of which lay on a major warp transit route. While the Tyranids did not use warp travel, these worlds were still of vital importance logistically to the Imperium, and it was hoped that using them as the linchpin in the defensive network would allow for a unified and coordinated front against the incoming Tyranids. Each anchor world was given a sub-sector's worth of resources, and in addition to their defensive role, they also provided bases for Soul Blades to operate from. Deploying into the paths of the tendrils of Promethor and Nautilon, the Soul Blades found themselves facing massive concentrations of Tyranids across a large, multi-system front. The tendrils did not move swiftly, however, and each comprised scores of smaller splinter fleets that broke away and sought out new prey. Sometimes they would even double back to strike at enclaves of human or other alien life. The Tyranids were taking their time, and this was something the Imperium sought to exploit. Using their speed to their advantage, the Soul Blades emerged victorious in countless tactical engagements, though their own losses were also terrible. Gradually, under constant Imperial and other alien attack, the advances of Nautilon and Promethor stalled and began to fragment. Hope would prove to be short-lived, however. While the Soul Blades eventually proved successful in slowing Nautilon and Promethor's advance, the hive mind countered this by launching its third tendril, dubbed Grendilus, up through the galactic plane and then attacking well behind the lines of the Soul Blades' advance. This allowed it to rampage through several sectors and leagues of Votan territory before it invaded the Bastior subsector. It was only when Group Master Tyson Jacobi's battle group Faustus encountered the tendril that the subsector became aware of the true extent of the invasion. At that time, Lord Commander Solar Leontus was located in the subsector, as he had made the anchor world Sanctum his base of operations. When he realized the full scale of the invasion, Leontus knew Bastior's Imperial forces were not enough to defend it. The Lord Commander Solar would then send out a plea for aid to the Soul Blades and any other Imperial forces outside the subsector that could help. Afterwards, Leontus ordered Bastior's Imperial forces to retreat from their current positions and reinforce either the Formidae, Pyromote, or Castale systems, which were named as sanctuary systems. However, this would not be possible for all of the Imperial forces, as they were already engaged with fighting Hive Fleet Grendilus or were unable to reach the sanctuary systems. Others, like Group Master Jacobi, meanwhile refused to retreat and either struck at the Hive Fleet whenever possible, or defended the worlds and systems they were located in when the invasion began. Some Imperials even attempted to flee from the subsector, but only a few were successful. Species like the Leagues of Votan, Orcs, Asuryani, Drukari, Necrons, Brood, Gluthic, and Mebri also either fought or fled from Grendilus. Soon, the entire sub-sector was invaded and several of Bastia's systems fell to the Hive Fleet. Sanctum itself seemed to be targeted by Grendilus, and some Imperials in the sub-sector speculated this was because the Hive Fleet knew of the Anchor World's importance. However, before the Bastia sub-sector was completely lost, the Soul Blade fleets arrived and began to turn the tide against Grendilus. Among them were commanders, like the Ultramarines, First Captain Severus Agamon, and the Adeptus Custodes Captain General Trajan Valoris, who aided in saving the life of Lord Commander Solar Leontus on Sanctum. Other Imperial forces also arrived to aid Bastior, and together these reinforcements have kept the Hive Fleet from consuming the subsector. The Imperium now fears, though, that with the Soulblades fighting Grendilus, the tendrils Nautilon and Promethor will be able to continue their advance upon Segmentum Solar. Thank you for listening to this entry from the Warhammer 40,000 Lexicanum.